The year is 1718. Somewhere in the Caribbean, a pirate ship limps into a hidden cove. The crew has just taken a prize, but the victory came at a cost. 3 men are down. One has a musket ball lodged in his shoulder. Another has a deep gash across his forearm, already turning an angry red. The third is burning with fever, shivering despite the tropical heat. There is no hospital waiting for them. No trained physician with clean instruments and bottled medicines. There is only the ship's surgeon, a man whose medical degree, if he ever had one, was earned through experience rather than study. His tools are a knife, a saw, a roll of linen, and a bottle of rum. This was the reality of medical care during the golden age of piracy, a period that stretched roughly from 1650 to 1730. The popular image of the pirate surgeon is a figure of dark comedy, a drunken butcher who amputated limbs with the same enthusiasm he applied to drinking. But the truth was more complicated. The men who served as surgeons on pirate ships operated at the very edge of medical knowledge, a place where the line between cure and curse was razor thin. To understand what these surgeons faced, you have to understand what they did not have. They had no germ theory. The idea that invisible organisms caused infection would not emerge for another century and a half. They had no reliable anesthetics beyond alcohol and opium. They had no antibiotics, no antiseptics, no understanding of how the human body actually fought disease. What they did have were centuries of folk wisdom, a handful of classical texts, and a desperate willingness to try anything. The role of the pirate surgeon was unique in the maritime world. On a naval vessel, the surgeon was a low-ranking officer, often treated with suspicion. On a pirate ship, the surgeon was a critical asset. He was often given a share of the plunder equal to the captain's, a sign of just how valuable his skills were considered. He was also expected to treat everyone, from the captain to the newest recruit, with equal attention. There was no room for favoritism when every hand was needed to sail the ship and fight the next battle. The challenges were immense. Injuries from combat were brutal and common. Swords left gaping wounds. Musket balls shattered bone. Cannon fire could tear a man apart. But combat was only part of the problem. Disease was the real killer. Scurvy, dysentery, malaria, yellow fever, typhus. These illnesses claimed far more lives than any battle ever did. And the treatments for these diseases were often as dangerous as the diseases themselves. The pirate surgeon worked in a cramped, dark space below deck, usually the hold or the gun deck. The conditions were appalling. The air was thick with smoke, sweat, and the smell of blood. The ship rolled and pitched with the waves. The surgeon had to perform amputations, the most common major surgery, in this environment. He had to do it quickly. A slow amputation meant a patient who bled to death or died from shock. The entire procedure, from the first cut to the final stitch, had to be completed in under a minute. But speed was only one part of the equation. The surgeon also had to make decisions about what to do with the severed limb. Some surgeons simply tossed it overboard. Others kept a bucket for the purpose. The real question was what to do with the patient afterward. The wound had to be cauterized, usually with a hot iron or boiling oil, to stop the bleeding and, the surgeon hoped, to prevent infection. The pain was unimaginable. The patient was often given a leather strap to bite on. Rum was poured down his throat, not just for the alcohol, but for the numbing effect. This was the world the pirate surgeon inhabited, a world of limited knowledge, brutal necessity, and constant improvisation. The men who practiced this medicine were not villains. They were not fools. They were men trying to save lives with the tools they had. And sometimes, against all odds, they succeeded. In the realm of pirate medicine, the practice of bloodletting and the use of leeches stand out as particularly fascinating, if not downright bizarre, examples of the unconventional cures employed by these seafarers. The theoretical basis for these practices was rooted in the medieval concept of humorism, which posited that the body contained 4 fluid-like substances, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, that needed to be kept in balance to maintain health. Pirate surgeons, often lacking formal medical training, would attempt to balance these humors by removing bad blood from the patient, either through the application of leeches or the use of lancets to cut veins. The tools used for bloodletting were often crude and unsanitary, increasing the risk of infection and further complicating the patient's condition. Leeches, on the other hand, were seen as a more gentle method of bloodletting, as they would attach themselves to the patient's skin and slowly drain the bad blood over a period of time. Despite the risks, these practices were often performed with a sense of urgency and desperation, as pirate surgeons sought to treat a wide range of ailments, from fever and inflammation to mental health issues and even the plague. The risks and consequences of these methods were very real, and many patients undoubtedly suffered as a result of these treatments. Infection, blood loss, and even death were all possible outcomes. And it is likely that many pirate surgeons were aware of these risks, yet felt compelled to act in the face of overwhelming medical need. The use of bloodletting and leeches also reflects the pirates' pragmatic approach to medicine, where the ends often justified the means, and the goal of treating the patient took precedence over concerns about safety and efficacy. As we examine the historical context in which these practices took place, it becomes clear that the pirate surgeon's toolbox was often a makeshift affair, cobbled together from whatever materials were available. The central conflict in the story of pirate medicine is the tension between the desire to heal and the limited understanding of human anatomy and disease, which often led to the use of unproven and even dangerous treatments. The scene around bloodletting and leeches moves forward with controlled tension and concrete detail, each gesture revealing the pressure, doubt, and decision-making that characterized the pirate surgeon's work. The emotional beat of the scene holds on apprehension and skepticism towards the effectiveness of these medieval practices, with clear consequences for the patient and the pirate surgeon alike. The use of bloodletting and leeches serves as a powerful reminder of the limitations and dangers of pirate medicine and the often desperate measures that were taken to treat the sick and injured. As we consider the legacy of pirate medicine, it is clear that the use of bloodletting and leeches represents a complex and multifaceted chapter in the history of medical practice, one that reflects both the ingenuity and the ignorance of the pirate surgeons who employed these techniques. The pirate surgeon's use of bloodletting and leeches was not simply a matter of ignorance or superstition, but rather a reflection of the broader cultural and medical context in which they practiced. The idea of balancing the humors and the use of bloodletting and other techniques to achieve this balance was a pervasive part of medieval medical thought and one that would take centuries to overcome. As we look back on the history of pirate medicine, it is clear that the use of bloodletting and leeches represents a fascinating, if often disturbing, example of the unconventional cures that were employed by these seafarers and the often desperate measures that were taken to treat the sick and injured. In the world of pirate medicine, the line between treatment and torture was often blurred, and the use of bloodletting and leeches serves as a powerful reminder of the risks and consequences of these practices. The scene around bloodletting and leeches closes on a completed action, preparing the next step in the narrative without cutting the narration short. The central conflict remains tied to the in-depth look at the medical tools and techniques used by pirate surgeons, including bloodletting and leeches, and the examination of the theoretical basis for these practices and their application in treating various ailments. The discussion of the risks and consequences of these methods continues, without leaving the narrative voice, each gesture revealing pressure, doubt, and decision as the setting forces the pirate surgeon to act. The use of bloodletting and leeches in pirate medicine serves as a testament to the resourcefulness and ingenuity of these seafarers, who were often forced to rely on makeshift medical techniques in the face of overwhelming need. The risks and consequences of these practices were very real, and it is likely that many patients suffered as a result of these treatments. Despite these risks, the pirate surgeon's use of bloodletting and leeches remains a fascinating example of the unconventional cures that were employed by these seafarers and the often desperate measures that were taken to treat the sick and injured. The scene around bloodletting and leeches moves forward with controlled tension and concrete detail, each gesture revealing the pressure, doubt, and decision-making that characterized the pirate surgeon's work. The emotional beat of the scene holds on apprehension and skepticism towards the effectiveness of these medieval practices, with clear consequences for the patient and the pirate surgeon alike. The use of bloodletting and leeches serves as a powerful reminder of the limitations and dangers of pirate medicine and the often desperate measures that were taken to treat the sick and injured. As we consider the legacy of pirate medicine, it is clear that the use of bloodletting and leeches represents a complex and multifaceted chapter in the history of medical practice, one that reflects both the ingenuity and the ignorance of the pirate surgeons who employed these techniques. The central conflict remains tied to the in-depth look at the medical tools and techniques used by pirate surgeons, including bloodletting and leeches, and the examination of the theoretical basis for these practices and their application in treating various ailments. Rum was more than a drink on a pirate ship. It was currency, comfort, and medicine, all in one brown bottle. When a man felt a fever coming on, the quartermaster would pour him a generous measure of rum mixed with something bitter, such as quinine bark or gunpowder. The logic seemed simple enough. Alcohol killed germs, or so the thinking went, and if a man drank enough of it, he might sweat out the sickness. However, the truth was more complicated. Rum did kill some bacteria, but it also dehydrated the patient and dulled the senses. A pirate with a high fever who drank heavily was more likely to become confused and fall overboard than to recover. Yet, the practice persisted because it produced an immediate effect. The patient felt warmer, less anxious, and often fell asleep. That sleep, even if it was alcohol-induced, sometimes gave the body enough rest to fight off the infection on its own. The problem was that rum could not distinguish between good bacteria and bad ones. It burned the throat, irritated the stomach lining, and did nothing for the underlying cause of most fevers, which were viral infections that alcohol cannot touch. Despite these limitations, rum remained a staple of pirate medicine, often used in conjunction with other substances. Tobacco, for instance, was another staple of pirate medicine. The ship surgeon would carry a roll of dried leaves in his kit, and he used it for everything from toothaches to wounds. The nicotine in tobacco is a powerful vasoconstrictor, which, when applied directly to a bleeding cut, slowed the flow of blood. That was a real, measurable effect, and it probably saved a few lives. However, the pirates also smoked tobacco to treat respiratory problems, which made no medical sense at all. The smoke irritated the lungs further, and the carbon monoxide reduced the blood's ability to carry oxygen. A pirate with a chest infection who lit a pipe was making himself worse, not better. The cultural attachment to tobacco was so strong that no surgeon questioned it. Every European sailor of the time used tobacco in some form, and the idea that it could heal was taken for granted. In fact, tobacco enemas were a common treatment in European hospitals for resuscitation. Blowing smoke into the rectum of a drowning victim was considered a legitimate medical procedure well into the 18th century. Pirates, who spent their lives around water, would have been familiar with this practice. When a pirate had a toothache, the cure was often worse than the pain. The ship's carpenter would pull the tooth with pliers, and the patient would bite down on a leather strap soaked in rum. If the tooth was too rotten, the surgeon might pack the cavity with a mixture of tobacco ash and turpentine. The turpentine burned like fire, but it also numbed the nerve for a few hours. The tobacco ash acted as a crude antiseptic, though it also introduced new bacteria into the wound. Pirates who survived these procedures often ended up with chronic infections in their gums. The real wonder is that any of them kept their teeth at all. The sugar in their diet, combined with the constant exposure to salt air and the lack of any dental hygiene, meant that tooth decay was universal. By the age of 30, most pirates had lost at least half their teeth. The ones who kept a full set were the lucky few who had access to fresh fruit and vegetables, which provided enough vitamin C to keep their gums healthy. The most bizarre cure of all involved mercury. Pirates who contracted syphilis, which was common in port cities, were given mercury pills or rubbed with mercury ointment. The metal caused the patient to salivate uncontrollably, which doctors believed was the body expelling the disease. In reality, the mercury was poisoning the patient. The salivation was a symptom of mercury toxicity, not a sign of healing. Patients who survived the mercury treatment often lost their teeth, their hair, and their sanity. The cure was far worse than the disease, but it remained the standard treatment for sexually transmitted infections for centuries. Pirates who refused the mercury treatment were considered foolish, but they were probably the ones who lived longer. The reliance on these substances tells us something important about pirate culture. These men were not stupid, they were desperate. When you are hundreds of miles from the nearest doctor, and your only options are rum, tobacco, or mercury, You will choose the one that makes you feel better right now. The long-term consequences do not matter when you might not survive the week. The pirate medical system was not based on ignorance. It was based on pragmatism. They used what they had, and they accepted the risks, because the alternative was doing nothing at all. That is the real lesson of pirate medicine. It was not good. It was not effective. But it was honest about its limitations. When a pirate drank rum for a fever, he knew it might not work. He just hoped it would. And sometimes, against all odds, it did. When we look back at the medicine practiced on pirate ships, it is easy to laugh. Leeches on a wound, a splash of rum on a fresh amputation, tobacco smoke blown into a man's rectum to revive him from drowning, these sound like jokes, not treatments. But if we stop at laughter, we miss something important. Pirate medicine was not stupid. It was desperate. And desperation, when paired with observation and limited resources, can teach us a great deal about how medicine actually works. The pirates' willingness to try anything, no matter how unorthodox, in the face of overwhelming odds, is a testament to the human spirit's capacity for survival and adaptation. In the end, pirate medicine may seem barbaric to us today, but it was a product of its time, born out of necessity and a lack of understanding. The pirates' use of rum, tobacco, and mercury, though often ineffective and sometimes harmful, was a genuine attempt to heal and survive in a world without modern medicine. Their methods may have been unorthodox, but their determination to live and thrive in the face of adversity is a quality that we can still learn from today. By examining the pirates' approach to medicine, we can gain a deeper understanding of the complexities of human health and the importance of adaptability in the face of uncertainty. The first lesson is about adaptability. A surgeon on a merchant ship had a proper kit. He had clean instruments, bandages, and a supply of known remedies. A pirate surgeon had whatever he could steal or trade. If he ran out of clean linen for bandages, he used sailcloth. If he had no splints, he used barrel staves. If the standard treatment for a wound called for a specific herb he did not have, he tried something else. He watched what happened. He remembered which substitutes worked and which ones killed the patient faster. This is not so different from how battlefield medicine evolves today. When a medic in a remote conflict runs out of plasma, they use saline. When they have no antibiotics, they clean the wound as thoroughly as possible and hope. The principle is the same. You work with what you have. The second lesson is about the limits of certainty. Modern medicine is built on data. We run clinical trials. We measure outcomes. We publish papers. A pirate surgeon had none of that. He had a few books, maybe a mentor, and his own experience. He knew that a man who lost a leg above the knee had about a 1 in 3 chance of surviving the surgery. He did not know why some lived and others died. He could not explain infection. He did not understand blood loss. But he knew the odds, and he acted anyway. There is a kind of honesty in that. He did not pretend to have answers he did not have. He told the patient the truth. You might die. I will try my best. That brutal frankness is something we have lost in an age of medical marketing and miracle cures. The third lesson is about the role of the patient. On a pirate ship, every man had a vote. The surgeon was elected by the crew. If they did not trust him, they replaced him. This meant the surgeon had to communicate clearly. He could not hide behind jargon. He had to explain why he was cutting off a leg or why he was applying a poultice of tar and turpentine. The patient had a say. Today, we call this shared decision-making. It is considered a modern innovation, but pirates were practicing it 300 years ago, not because they were enlightened, because they had to. A crew that did not trust its surgeon was a crew that would mutiny. There is also a darker lesson. Some of the worst pirate treatments came from a refusal to accept ignorance. When a man had scurvy, the standard naval treatment was citrus juice. But citrus was expensive and hard to store, so pirate surgeons tried other things. They tried vinegar, they tried sauerkraut, they tried boiling pine needles into a tea. None of these worked as well as citrus. But the surgeons kept trying because they did not want to admit that the best cure was something they could not easily get. This is a warning. When resources are scarce, the temptation to believe in a false cure is very strong. It is the same temptation that leads people today to spend money on supplements that do nothing. The pirate surgeon who fed his crew sauerkraut instead of lemons was not evil. He was desperate and wrong, and he let his desperation override the evidence he had. So what remains of pirate medicine today? Very little in terms of actual treatments. We do not use leeches for bloodletting anymore, though we do use them in microsurgery to restore blood flow to reattached fingers and ears. We do not use rum as an antiseptic, though we do use alcohol-based hand sanitizers. We do not blow tobacco smoke into anyone, but the spirit of pirate medicine is alive in every emergency room where a doctor has to improvise. It is alive in every field hospital where supplies run low. It is alive in every moment when a medical professional has to make a decision with incomplete information. The pirate surgeon was not a hero. He was often dirty, sometimes drunk, and frequently wrong. But he was also a pragmatist. He did what he could with what he had. He learned from his mistakes because the cost of a mistake was a dead crewmate. And he never stopped trying. That is not a bad legacy. In the end, the weirdest thing about pirate medicine might be how much it still has to teach us. Not about which herbs to use or how to set a bone, but about how to keep going when the odds are against you, about how to admit you do not know, and about how to try anyway. That is a lesson that never goes out of style.